I'm going to begin this tutorial pretending like you know nothing about transforming. So here I have a couple of objects that are on one layer, and I'm going to transform the entire layer to change the size of it. To do that, I need to be on that layer, make sure I don't have anything selected by hitting Command D to deselect, and then go to the Edit menu and choose Free Transform, which will bring up my transform controls. I can change the size of these objects by grabbing the top right corner, or really any of these corners, clicking and dragging it in or down or wherever I feel like taking it. Now you'll notice it's squishing and stretching. Before you let go of your mouse, don't let go of that yet, hit Shift and that will snap that thing right into proportion. So anytime you want to actually scale something in proportion, hold down Shift. If you let go of all of that, your Shift and your mouse key, and move your mouse outside of this box, you will notice that it turns into a little rotate symbol if you're kind of around one of these corners. If you click and drag outside of this, it will rotate around a central pivot point, which is this little crosshairs that you probably can't even see in the middle. If you hold down Shift, it will snap it in kind of 10 or 15 degree increments, so you can easily get something to go perfectly horizontal or vertical if you hold down Shift. Also, when you're in this transform mode, if you look up at the control bar, you actually have windows where if you know exactly what angle something should be at, you can enter in that angle and have it automatically pop to that angle. Now I've just been hitting Command Z to go back to my basic transform, which you can do within a transform. The other things you should know are if you right click, you have some options like flip horizontal or flip vertical, or even rotate by 90 degrees, clockwise, counterclockwise, or 180 degrees. Those are some of the really common things that we do with transform. Now before we finish this transform, I want to introduce you to the pivot point. If you hover over the little crosshairs in the center of your image, you can actually click and move it somewhere other than the center. That means when you let go of it, that is the new center pivot point, and if you rotate, it will rotate around that point. It will also flip around that point. So this time if I hit flip vertical, instead of just flipping upside down in place, it will flip above that point. So now I'm hitting Command Z to go back to the way it was and hitting enter. Now we're pretty much back to where we started, but you've been introduced to some of the basic transform controls. Now if you have a layer and you want to affect only a part of it, you need to select that part. So I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool and click and drag a selection around this black square. If I want to move that square and rotate it or shrink it, all of that fun stuff, I can hit my Command T shortcut, and then I can move it by moving my mouse inside of that square. I can rotate it by moving my mouse outside of that square and grabbing around one of the corners, and I can make it perfectly smaller by holding Shift and moving in from one of those corners. And then to finish, I can hit Enter. Now you need to hit enter usually before Photoshop will let you go on and do anything else. So keep in mind if you're in the middle of a transform and trying to do something like add type or switch layers, you might get a beep or a note that says no, you can't do that because you need to finalize your transform first. So we're pretty much done with this little box. Let's select it and get rid of it. So I've selected it and just hit the delete and then Command D. I can grab my move tool and I'm going to move my car up here to the upper left corner and then hold down Option to click and drag a copy. Whenever you transform a regular pixel layer, it's really important to remember that a transform permanently alters the pixels of a layer. Here's what I mean. If I take this car and transform by hitting Command T, hold Shift so it's proportional, and shrink it down quite small and hit Enter, when I hit Enter, it's finalized that transform and has permanently altered those pixels to fill only that small area. Now this becomes really obvious if I transform this layer again and make it big. So here I've sized it back up about to the original size, but when I hit Enter, you can see there is a massive quality difference between the top and the bottom. The reason why is because when we transformed that car small, it became like we were copying in a really tiny picture. And I know previously we've already talked about you shouldn't scale a really small thing really big and expect it to look good, because Photoshop can't create pixels out of nothing. So good rule of thumb is you can scale down, you can scale a little bit bigger, but never scale lots bigger. You probably need to start out big and work your way small. So I'm going to get rid of that nasty layer and make another copy of this by grabbing my Move tool, holding down Option, and clicking and dragging on that layer. Let me show you a couple more transform options that we've got. So hit Command T to pull up your transform controls, and then take a look up at the control bar. There is a little mesh with an arrow by it over by the No symbol. If you click on that, you'll have a warp option. You can also get the warp option by right-clicking and it will show up in that menu we were just looking at. With warp, you can do some things like adding a preset, which is down in the custom or the warp drop menu, such as an arc. You can arc an image. Most of these should have a little control dot somewhere on it that if you click it, you can simply click and drag, but also the dimensions of this can be controlled up here in the control bar by clicking and dragging on the word or on the value. There's quite a few things in here. They're sort of fun to mess with and play around with, but I want to show you the coolest thing about warp. However, we're going to go back up to custom for this to happen. When it's on custom, you might notice you got a couple extra dots around your car. If I click on one of these corners now and drag it in, it will only drag that portion of the warp graph, which is kind of nifty. And it is pretty darn changeable. Now, it will allow you to warp something up to a certain extent. If you overdo it, you'll probably get some pixelated things going on, but you can get quite a significant distort on it and really caricaturize, if that's even a word, an object or a person by playing with this really cool warp function. Here's the thing though, once you've edited something like this with warp and hit enter, if you go to transform it again on a regular pixel layer, those warp functions will no longer, it won't remember the settings, I guess I should say. So to prove my point, I'm going to right click on this and choose warp, and it will apply a regular graph to this just as it had before. So I'm going to hit enter to get out of that. So that's some pretty cool transform things. One last couple of transform tricks, and this is sort of a, if you're really cool and want to know this, cue in, and otherwise you can tune out. But I'm going to create a circle with my elliptical marquee tool, and by the way, I did make a new layer for this. I'm going to fill it with my foreground color by hitting Option Delete, and then I'm going to deselect that sucker. Photoshop has a remember last transform function. So here I'm on this layer, it's deselected. Check this out. I'm going to copy the layer by hitting Command J and then Command T to transform, and I'm going to move that layer over, and I'm holding Shift so it'll move straight over, and then hit enter. Now I believe this is in here somewhere, but honestly I've never used it from the from the menu, so I'm just going to tell you it's Command Option Shift T. So I'm holding down Command Option Shift, and every time I hit T, it will make a new copy layer and do that same transform to it. So I'm getting a new layer for each one of these, but they are perfectly distanced one from another, and each coming out with a new layer. How cool is that? So let me walk you through that one more time. I'm going to select all of my extras here and get rid of them. So here I start with my original layer, nothing selected. I duplicate it by hitting Command J and then transform by Command T. Then I do whatever transform I want it to do. Now the last one I did dots in a row, but I can actually move it over, move the rotate it, scale, and do a whole bunch of stuff to it. Now I'm going to hold down the Command, Option, and Shift keys and then hit T. And every time I hit T, as in Thomas or transform, it will do that same transform over and over and over, and each time it creates a new layer because I included a layer creation as part of that. Now you might think, well, that's kind of cool, but where would I use that? Well, I use it rather a lot, especially if I have to create a pattern of some sort. So here on my new layer, I'm going to use my rectangular marquee tool and create a stripe and fill it by hitting Option Delete and then deselect Command D. I can create a stripe pattern by hitting Command J to duplicate, Command T to transform, and then I'm just going to use my nudge tool, so Shift and arrow to move it over however much space I want, and hit Enter. And now when I hold down that Command Option Shift and hit T, I can get a stripe pattern going on. So it has its uses. Sometimes it's just cool as a party trick, but you can play with that and try a few things out and see what you think. So those are the basic Command T or transform functions. Keep in mind that if it's a pixel layer, you really can't go much bigger than the original pixel layer without losing image quality. If you finalize a transformation, it has permanently changed the pixels of that layer. So if you transform something really small and finalize it, and then try and transform it really big or back to the original size, it's going to lose image quality. So good rule of thumb, go from large to small and not from small to large.